पर्वतामच्युतव पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्. Namo Ramana. We will commence today's satsang, the Atma Vichara session, by listening to Bhagavan's Upadesham, and we have been reading from the book Ramanacentre Self-Enquiry 1900 to 1950, a compilation of all the answers given by Bhagavan on Atma Vichara between 1900 to 1950. The compilation has been done by our founder, President Sri Ramananjali, and we are looking at the question answer sessions between 1936 to 1950, and last week we looked at the question number 22, and we will we'll read that question and continue to look into question number 23 and 24, contemplate on the answers given by Bhagavan by his grace, and then have a 20-minute Atma Vichara session, following which our President Sarada would be talking about Atma Vichara as it has been contemplated in Ramana Gita by Ganapati Muni. And finally, we'll have the concluding prayers to Bhagavan. I'll read out the last week's question answer. Devotee, how shall I reach the self? Bhagavan, there is no reaching the self. If the self were to be reached, it would mean that the self is not now and here, but that it should be got anew. What is got afresh will also be lost, so it will be impermanent. What is not permanent is not worth striving for. So I say, the self is not reached. You are the self. You are already that. The fact is that you are ignorant of your blissful state. Ignorance supervenes and draws a veil over the pure bliss. Attempts are directed only to remove this ignorance. This ignorance consists of wrong knowledge. The wrong knowledge consists in the false identification of the self with the body, the mind, etc. This false identity must go, and there remains the self. In this answer, Bhagavan, as always, is reiterating that we are nothing but the self. And all the wrong knowledge that we have, we go on superimposing by identifying ourselves with the body, the mind, the intellect, the world, and anything, is the only reason that we find that the self is far away. Actually, we are verily the self. So all this superimposing and wrong identification is all that we need to let go. Then the self that is available is seen to be always present. So the devotee further asks, how is that to happen? And Bhagavan says, by enquiry into the self. Now, we are actually looking for an answer, the answer for the self. But the very questioner is the superimposition on the self is not something that we understand. Therefore, even though Bhagavan gives an answer that you are already the self, and all the superimposing is all that we need to let go, but that understanding that we have to let go everything is also understood by the same entity which has superimposed itself, the ego, the ignorance, the wrong idea that brings the consciousness and the inert body together and ties a knot and appears to be real. It is the same entity which is trying to understand the answer. And it strongly believes in its reality, and it strongly believes that it can see the self like any other object. So even though Bhagavan says very clearly that you are the self, and once you drop all the wrong knowledge, the self becomes available, becomes clear. But even that is understood, as I said, by this superimposed entity. Therefore, it again puts another question: how is that to happen? Bhagavan says that this would become a vicious circle now. So, whatever answer Bhagavan would give, it is again understood by this superimposed entity, and instead of it questioning its own identity, if it goes on, tries to understand more and more new answers, it will have more new doubts. In fact, Bhagavan says in the story between Dakshinamurti and the Sanat Kumara and Sanat Sujatiyas and all, that this happened there also. Mother Parvati asked Dakshinamurti to go and help these people to understand the self. And when he was sitting there below the banyan tree as a 16-year-old boy, these aged people, the rishis, were asking new doubts about the self every day, and Dakshinamurti was explaining the answers, and they would contemplate on that answer, come up with a new doubt, and he would again answer it. Then finally he went into Mauna, says Bhagavan. Oh, and Murugana Swami, is this the way it happens? And Bhagavan says, yes, that's the way it happened. So, in a way, Bhagavan is saying, in two ways, he is saying, any answer that we read outside and contemplate, it is again by the superimposed entity. And he is also saying, if you answer yourself also to the question, who am I? It is again an answer given by the superimposed entity for its own gratification, and it may again, after that, doubt or forget. Anything could happen. Therefore, Bhagavan says, by an inquiry into the self, and he puts the lower self, the small s here, by inquiry into the self. That means by inquiring who is this knower, who is this entity who wants to know, who is this entity who is having all these doubts, who is this entity who is identifying with the body and mind. So, until we doubt the doubter, which Bhagavan keeps on saying, we will not see the self which is naturally available, because we would be still looking through the eyes of this doubter. We will be understanding through the doubter, and any understanding is again going to be doubtful. So only when we doubt the doubter and see that the doubter himself is the source of the problem, as long as I keep on entertaining this doubter, then all these superimpositions continue to be there. And as long as these superimpositions of I being the body and the mind, a doubt is nothing but a thought. So this identification with the body and mind will continue to be there. And this superimposition will happen by very virtue of me attending to this doubter. When that becomes very, very clear, that is when we understand that we just have to transcend all this and not give reality to any of this, and then the self alone is. It is just that this doubter is real, and his understanding in this capacity to understand is real, and he will understand it one day. The entire reality we are giving to this division, which is really not there. In self, if self is everything, there cannot be a division of a person who wants to know. So, as long as we keep reality to this division, that there is an entity to know, to understand, to do, we will not realize the self, because the very division makes us not see the unity behind it. So Bhagavan is saying here, how is that to happen? Instead of now answering it, Bhagavan is saying by inquiry into the self. Then the devotee asks, it is difficult. Can I realize the self, Maharaj? Kindly tell me. It looks so difficult. It looks so difficult for the words on this paper to know, on the words on this paper to know the paper, because it's superimposed on the paper itself. And or in a more normal way to say, if a character on the screen wants to know the screen, the very act of the character appearing on the screen and it being real, it is actually covering up the screen. And the very virtue of it covering up, no matter what it tries to know the screen, it cannot know, because it has already covered up the very screen and it has appeared on the very screen which it wants to know. Unless it realizes that the film has to stop and what remains is only the screen. So Bhagavan is saying in the same way here. The question is, tell me, it looks so difficult. To which Bhagavan is answering, you are already the self. Therefore, realization is common to everyone. Realization knows no difference in the aspirants. Very beautiful words here. Realization knows no difference in the aspirants. This very doubt, can I realize, or the feeling I have not realized, or the obstacles, be free from that also. So Bhagavan is saying very beautifully, again reassuring that you are already the screen, you are not the film, you are not the thoughts, you are not this body, you are not this intellect. All that appears superimposed and real is not that you are. It appears to whom, when you inquire, that on which it appears, the screen, or to which it cognizes all of this, that self, you are already that. Without you, you can't know that you are the body. Without you, you can't know you are the mind. Without you, you can't know there is a world. Without you, there is no existence to the body. Without you, there is no existence to mind. None of this exists or becomes cognized apart from you. So Bhagavan is saying, you are the very screen, you are the very self. Therefore, realization is already there. So there cannot be anybody who says that I am not realized, because it is through that entity everybody knows their body. It is there through that reality everybody finds the existence of the body. It is through that reality everything seems to appears to exist. It is because of that reality everything is known. So if I know, and if I can find its existence of anything, then it is because of my own existence, my own knowing. And Bhagavan gives a beautiful analogy that once we are in the dark room where there is no light, even if we are asked, are you there? We don't need a light or any other person's assurance to say, I exist, I know. Therefore, Bhagavan is saying that realization is common to everyone. Even an ant knows that it is. Even a plant knows that it is. So everything is common. So that is the truth. And Bhagavan says, realization knows no difference in the aspirant. From the perspective of the aspirant, I may want to know the self, but from the perspective of the self, it is already everything, and it is the one which is knowing. It is the one which has given existence to everything. Therefore, for the self, there is nothing apart from the self. This everything is also a wrong division we talk about by giving reality to the individual notion. Actually, self is everything. Self alone is. That is the right way to put it. This very doubt, can I realize, or the feeling I have not realized, are the obstacles. As we looked at it, the doubt created by the doubter, the first division, is the main obstacle. So Bhagavan says, every time a thought rises in this form, be free from that. Therefore, every thought, Bhagavan says in Atma Vichara, to be inquired, recognize that it is the one which is causing the obstruction or causing the superimposition on the self, and diligently let it go. Bhagavan says, every time a thought rises, no matter whether it's a good thought, bad thought, or a spiritual thought, diligently let it go, because it is causing the superimposition on the truth. By inquiring to whom is this thought, but if the wrong idea I is still there, the answer will come, it is for me. Then Bhagavan further asks us to inquire, who am I? And let go that superimposition that I as an individual exists. When everything is the self, where is this wrong idea? So he asks us to inquire, who am I? And transcend the I also, the limited I identity also, by inquiring, who am I? And we should remember, any answer we may give to it is again by holding on to the I, and therefore superimposing the answer onto the self which is there. And by very virtue of it, the self which is though very openly available becomes masked or veiled. Therefore, we need not, there is no answer to the question, who am I? The question, who am I, should take us to that realization that self alone is, and remain one in it, transcending all thoughts here and now. With repeated practice, Bhagavan assures that the mind will gain enough strength to remain in the source, in the self. With the immense grace of Bhagavan, with which we have come to this most direct path, for the next 20 minutes, let us do Atma Vichara.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining as the self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self manifest as Ramana, we have been blessed to meditate on the practice of self-inquiry and also to have a session of practice of self-inquiry. And we continue to meditate on Bhagavan's teachings, which throw light on our practice of self-inquiry. These teachings as recorded in Ramana Gita. We are now meditating on the 5th chapter of Ramana Gita, and we were on the verses 10, 11 and 12, where Bhagavan has already told us about the truth about the heart, saying that it is the source. The heart is the source, and all descriptions of the heart would be concepts. However, out of concession for us, he has given us the concept that the spiritual heart is on the right side. It is not the physical blood pumping organ. It is not the Anahata chakra which is at the center. It is the spiritual center from which the energy goes through the Shushumna Nadi to the Sahasrara in the head, and that is the mind center. And from the mind, it permeates the whole body. And when it permeates the whole body, a person becomes a samsari. He becomes worldly. He becomes world-oriented. He becomes object-oriented. He or she becomes object-oriented. What is world? World is an object. I see something that becomes a world for me. So, one becomes object-oriented because of the light of the self permeating the body. The first object, actually, the first part of the world is the body itself. That is the first object that we recognize. The body is an object, but we identify with that object. And then we identify with other objects in the world to greater or lesser degree. So Bhagavan says, samsari manujo bhavet. Okay, but if the Sahasrara, he said, if the Sahasrara is rooted in the heart, if one goes back to the source and stays there, then the world or the sankalpas or the desires are always towards objects. They are in order to possess an object, to experience an object. So when one takes the mind back to the heart source, the desires do not arise. Even if apparently the physical objects are in proximity to us, the desires regarding them do not arise, says Bhagavan to us. So the clue is that we must take the mind back to the source and make it abide there, allow it to abide there. Then the sankalpas will not arise. So he says, then in these verses which we were meditating on, he said, he gave us the demarcation between nirvikalpa samadhi and sahaja samadhi. Because, see, he has already told us that when the mind abides in the heart through self-inquiry, through taking the mind back to its source, through whence am I, through who am I, taking the mind back to the source and abiding there will be no sankalpas, even if the objects are perceived, even if they are nearby. Such a state, Bhagavan says, is sahaja. Grinhatopi sthiraikadhi sahaja sthitiruchyate. Grinhatopi, even if objects are grasped, even if experiences are grasped by attention, when the dhi, sthira eka, sthiraika dhi, When the mind is sthira, it is unmoving, it is on the eka, that state, sahaja sthiti ruchyate, that is called sahaja sthiti. Nirvikalpa samadhistu. What is a nirvikalpa samadhi? The nirvikalpa samadhi is vishaya asannidhau bhavet. Nirvikalpa samadhistu vishaya sannidho bhavet. There is no knowledge of objects in nirvikalpa samadhi. So the path is actually through nirvikalpa into sahaja. Because when we are searching for the self, what is it that prevents our experience of the self? If we go to the earlier verses, Bhagavan says, by becoming aware of the body, one has become a samsari. So, the samsara has to be taken back. Just as Bhagavan said, that is, the Atma Shakti rises from the heart to the Sahasrara, then to the whole body, which is the world, which is the doorway to the world. So we said, Bhagavan has shown us the way back. Draw it back from the world, draw it back from the world which manifests as multifarious thoughts in our mind, draw it back to the single I thought, which is the Sahasrara, and then by questioning who am I or whence am I, take it back to the source. Now, why is it important? Why is Bhagavan telling us about the nirvikalpa state when the goal is the sahaja state? It is because we have to cross through the nirvikalpa. This crossing through the nirvikalpa is crossing over the identification with the deep sleep. Very often, Nandakumarji says that when we question who am I or whence am I, and the mind becomes totally silent, we bring the deep sleep into the waking. We bring the unknown into the waking. See, unless we are ready to completely get into the unknown, we cannot experience the self. So long as we are holding on to any known entity, we are holding on to thought. If I am holding on to this body, if I think I am Sarada, how can I simultaneously experience that which is beyond or transcending this entity of being Sarada? Unless the identification with Sarada is dropped, I cannot experience the self. In Ulladu Narpadu Anubandham, Bhagavan tells us that if we want to hold the body and get into the self, it is like trying to cross a river by riding a crocodile. By riding on a crocodile, only Ganga can ride on a crocodile. But if we try to ride on a crocodile, what becomes of us? Can we cross the river? We'll become food to the crocodile. And that is what happens. We are food to this body idea. The body idea is eating us up gradually from birth to death. And then again it eats us up. Every time we take a form, it is consuming us. We become food to that idea. So, holding on to the body idea, we cannot experience the self. And the rise of any thought means the body has already, body idea, the ego or the body idea is already risen. This Bhagavan explains to us in Ashtakam. He says, Indraham enum ninevenir pira undrum indru aduvarai pira ninevadil arkerku. When the other thoughts arise, that means already the I thought has arisen. If I thought is not there, no other thought will be there. That is nirvikalpa. When I thought is not there, no other thought will be there. So we have to get to a point where no objects are there, but awareness is held. When awareness is held, minus objects, we get into nirvikalpa experience of the self. So, how to ensure that we get to the nirvikalpa or the thought-free state, we have to be rid of thoughts. We have to be rid of thoughts. Why rid of thoughts? Because if thoughts are not there, thinker also will not be there. Because who is a thinker? A thinker is one who has thoughts. An experiencer is one who has experiences. So if there are no experiences, the one who is the experiencer will not be there. If the objects are not there, the subject will not be there. If the subject is not there, the objects will not be there. This because it's only a relative condition. The subject-object relationship is relative. One cannot exist without the other. So if we directly ask, who am I? Intensely, then automatically all the thoughts will have to be dropped or they will have to disappear, because when I don't know who I am, what am I going to be thinking about? How can I think about anything unless I know who I am? Unless I have some identity, how can I think about anything? So if my identity is being questioned, if the validity of my identity is being questioned, when I am asking who am I, at that point when I am asking who am I cannot have any other thought. So every time one asks who am I, one actually gets into nirvikalpa samadhi. One gets into the silence. However, that nirvikalpa samadhi may be so minuscule in terms of the what we experience as time period, that it does not leave its imprint on the mind. There seems to be the simultaneous existence of thought if it rises immediately. In fact, when thoughts, every thought actually sinks back into the source and another thought rises, because Bhagavan says that at a time we can have only one thought. And psychology also has arrived at this point, which is intuited by our sages and Bhagavan. So, when at a time we can have only one thought, so how is it that we seem to be having multiple thoughts? Psychology explains this phenomena as a very speedy, a very fast shifting of attention from one to the other. So Ashtavadana, Shatavadana and all people who can do 8 tasks at a time, 100 tasks at a time are capable of quickly shifting their attention from one to the other, very fast. And hold on to the process of attention at the same time. Whereas for most of us, what happens? The speed with which one thought disappears and another arises gives us a feeling of a continuity of thoughts. It's like watching an animation movie. In an animation movie, there is no action. There is no action at all. There are only a series of still pictures. But the still pictures are moved so fast that we get the impression or the illusion of animation, of movement. Animus means movement, alive. We get the feeling it is alive. So it is like that. Bhagavan says our thoughts are also like that. One thought, if we slow down the process of thinking, we will realize that one thought subsides, another thought arises. And when one thought subsides, it has to subside into the self. Therefore, the silence is experienced by every one of us. But when we ask, who am I? Gradually the thought process becomes slower, there is less of attachment to the thoughts that are arising. Gradually, there is less of attachment to the thoughts that arise. So when there is a lot of attachment to the thoughts that arise, there is very speedy process of thinking. But when there is less of attachment, then the thought process becomes calm, it becomes slower, it becomes unhurried. Then one is able to, without one's knowledge, start perceiving or experiencing the silence of the self, which is there in the gaps between the thoughts. This is unconscious to begin with. But when we ask ourselves, who am I? If the question has intensity, then what will happen is there will be a perfect experiencing of silence, which is called nirvikalpa. It is then when we experience it, we know that at that point only there is confirmed knowledge that, hey, I exist without thoughts. My existence is not dependent on thoughts. Which means if it is not dependent on thoughts, it's not dependent on any experience, including the experience I am Sarada, which is the primary thought. I am so and so, I am this body, is the primary thought. So when one experiences that thought-free state or the nirvikalpa, it is absolutely clear. At that point, it will become absolutely clear to us that one is not the body. One is not any experience associated with the body. But Bhagavan, I think it's Maharshi's Gospel, he gives a very clear definition between of the difference between Laya, Nirvikalpa and Sahaja. And he says in Nirvikalpa, it is like a bucket of water submerged in the well. So what happens? The identity of the bucket is irrelevant because the bucket is submerged in the well. It is there, the water is inside and the water is outside, and the experience is only of the water. However, when you draw the bucket out of the well, the bucket of water, when it's drawn out of the well, again the identified existence returns. So the nirvikalpa is experienced. It is remembered. It is remembered with the identity. It is remembered as my having experienced it. So it becomes subsidiary to my existence as this entity. It becomes one of my experience and dependent on my going back to that experience. It becomes dependent on that. See, I think that I must go back into the thought-free state. I must experience the thought-free state. I must keep on getting back to it until it becomes steady. So it becomes my effort. I still continue to hold that experience of the self within my identity. I think it is mine. Whereas this is not there at all. This entity is not there at all. That alone is the reality. That which is experienced in Nirvikalpa is alone the reality. Not the reality is not what happens when we come out of Nirvikalpa. So gradually again one may start recognizing that is the reality. This is the illusion. It is not as if this is holding that, but this is an illusion that continues to arise. So when one begins to understand this, when one begins to gradually remember that to be one's own nature and continuously remember that to be one's own nature, that would permeate our daily activities as well. It would become an undercurrent to all the activities until it becomes absolutely steady. Then Bhagavan says that is like a river merging into the sea. The river merging into the sea cannot come out of it. The bucket in the well can come out of it, but the river merging into the sea cannot come out of it. So Bhagavan here is telling us that we have to enter through enquiry. We have to enter the point of nirvikalpa. We have to be ready to renounce all objective knowledge and readiness to renounce is very, very important to give us strength in our inquiry. And of course, the process has to be the inquiry, because if I say I want to renounce, that would become one more thought. I want to renounce all my thoughts. So Bhagavan is giving us a question wherein there is a minimal vestige of identification, just the question alone. And by the power of that question, automatically the thoughts would subside. Who am I? So that has to be there, the intensity of longing for the self, the understanding that all these objects are not real, they are not the source of joy which I am seeking, and what I am seeking is only the self, and all answers lie only in the self. So Bhagavan will go on to tell us why all answers lie only in the self. And he also will go on to tell us how to get back, if we say that this is an understanding of how we cross over this unknown, the fear of the unknown, by experiencing the unknown, by experiencing the zero identity in waking through Nirvikalpa. He will also explain to us how to cross over the body identity, how to cross over through the mind identity. By His grace, every word of His is an awakening for us, and it will continue to do its task until we have that state which he is talking about, the Sahaja Sthiti. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramana.
Thank you, Akka. Amar Satchit Sukhavidashe Yasyormi Matrum Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Ramanam Gabhiram Chintavihinam Hridi Chintayami Chintavihinam Hridi Chintayami.